Some good news. Should we dream for a moment that the woke mind virus might just be on its deathbed? According to Pew Research, 52% of American workers have been trained in diversity, equity and inclusion.
That's like the majority of people. God damn, that's nuts. 50%?
Can you believe it? Of $8 billion a year to industry. But DEI policies, popularised in 2020 after the death of George Floyd, well, they're starting to be wound back as people get sick to death of being pitted against each other. Walmart is the latest corporation to announce they are completely abandoning DEI policies. And this is not a tweak.
Well, this is not a surprise, because a lot of the policies are effectively ways to create hiring biases that are going to leave them open to lawsuits. I'm actually surprised. Like, I remember whenever this stuff got popular, I was always really shocked that it ever did, because it's like, how can you provide preferential hiring practices to groups of people based off of immutable characteristics? I feel like, yeah, what are we even talking about? Of course that's bad.
Absolute overhaul of all of their policies. Here's what they've announced. They've announced that they will close down their Equity Racial Centre, which they established in 2020 at a cost of $100 million. It's
so obviously violating Civil Rights Act. Yeah, I know. And I feel like the problem is that the optics of going against it were really bad. And so people just kind of let it happen. But now that I think people are fed up, now it's like, okay, well, you know, we were breaking the law for like many years, and now finally it's going to go away. So yeah, RIP minus 100 million. Yeah, there you go.
They've said they're no longer going to take into account the racial and gender mix of suppliers when ordering contracts. They've said they're no longer going to monitor LGBTQ plus inclusion in their workplace.
Which is what they should do. Like, working at Walmart shouldn't matter if you're gay or not. What would, if you're a dude that likes to suck other dudes' dicks, I don't think that, when would you need to know? Like, if that is part of your job at Walmart, maybe you should be working somewhere else. Yeah, maybe it should be somewhere else.
More than that, they're going to review the sponsorship of all Pride events, so they're not financially supporting anything that sexualizes children, which basically means they won't be supporting any Pride events. And on top of
that's another big issue that I think a lot of people, like, this was a losing issue that a lot of people tried to push, was the idea that, like, having underage people at events that are based around sexual expression, huge tactical mistake, massive tactical mistake. Average, everyday Walmart Americans do not want to see a stripper or drag queen taking their clothes off next to a 7-year-old. This is not normal. It's not good. It's not helping anybody. It's not popular at all. It's gross. Exactly. It's weird. It's extremely weird. Completely unnecessary.
That they're reviewing.
That's not happening? Well, of course it is. I've seen videos and pictures of it happening. I've seen multiple pictures. How many of you guys have seen pictures of Pride events where you have people that are dressed in ways that are sexually suggestive and then having kids in the same photos? I've seen them. Yeah, what are we talking about? Like, it doesn't happen. It obviously happens. If it didn't happen, there wouldn't be photos everywhere of it and videos.
All of their products and getting rid of anything that sexualizes or promotes trans and non-binary products to children. Now, bear in mind, Walmart employ 1.8 million Americans. So this is a big deal, but they're not the first company to do this. The Ford Motor Company, Lowe's, Boeing, Harley-Davidson have all announced prior to Walmart's announcement that they too are abandoning DEI principles. So,
well, you have to assume that holding those principles probably results in less money made. Because the odds are that they were probably doing what makes them the most money, and then they found out that doing what makes them the most money doesn't fit into these categories of representation. So what they're doing is they are artificially nerfing themselves, basically, and making decisions based off of things that are not financially motivated. Money's the only reason companies make any decision. Exactly. But like, basically what they had thought in the past was, and this is what I'm assuming, right? But what I'm assuming is that I think these companies thought that it would be a better idea to try to take over and do this stuff because it would lead to better consumer reception and a better brand, like a better brand recognition. And so people are going to like the company more because they're doing these things that are progressive thinking, right? That's why like a lot of companies do this. Like, by the way, all companies participating in charities or any social event or anything like that, it's all just a marketing ploy, right? And so this happening is very, very fucking clearly a result of that. So if they're participating in this in order to make people like them more, and then people stop liking the thing that they're participating in, then it would serve them no purpose to participate in it anymore, right? And this is something I've been saying for years. Is that the moment that this turns around and it begins actually causing them to lose money and making them lose brand value, then they will immediately pretend like they never did it. So yeah, shit loves become what they hate. They're not Christians for pushing an ideology. Now they're the ones pushing religion. Well, I think a lot of people do, right? For sure. It'd be like having a female mascot for a football brand. Well, I mean, if she's in a bikini, I think that might work, right? But like, if you have a thing for a bunch of guys, they're probably going to want to watch a bunch of guys or girls in bikinis. So it's just that simple. So yeah.
And Liz, here's my question. Yes. Is this because of Trump, or was this already happening and Trump kind of tapped into a groundswell that existed already and is growing stronger, not just in America, but maybe here in Australia as well?
It's a symbiotic relationship. Like, there are a lot of people that didn't like it, and then Trump winning made a lot of people not like it, but or a lot more people not like it. But like, it's kind of like a multiplier effect. But it was already happening before this.
Like with Bud Light is a good example.
This was definitely already happening as these companies just came to bear with what they were actually doing and going, what are we getting out of this? It's certainly not floating with our base. On top of the companies that you've already listed, there's John Deere, Tractor Supply, Molson Coors, Jack Daniels. I think they've just realised we're spending all these money on this DEI initiatives. It's simply not floating with our customer base. And perhaps just the general question of, what are we doing this anyway? Like, John Deere is a tractor.
Well, yeah, exactly. It doesn't serve any purpose to improve the product or make anybody more money. And in fact, I think that it probably serves to make them less money because they have to use criteria that's not completely financially driven. So, like, if you didn't need... So, like, the thing is that, like, logically, if this was happening already and they were making the most amount of money, they wouldn't have needed a separate policy in order to recalibrate. So, like, it very clearly causes them to lose money.
Company. What interest do you have in DEI, in preaching to people, whether it be your employees or your clients, your customers, about this kind of thing? Also, what helps really get this on the nose is a new study by a place called Network Contagion Research Institute, NCRI, in America. They've done some study on these DEI practices, which are very prolific, not just in workplaces, but in schools, in universities, very much in America, and as we know, here in Australia as well. Yeah. So here's the guy who headed up this study. His name is...
How do you know it's like him?
Yeah,
it
looks like a girl. He said what we did in this study was we took a lot of these ideas that were found to still be very prominent in a lot of these DEI lectures and interventions and training, and we said, well, how is this going to affect people? What we found is that when people are exposed to this ideology, what happens is they become hostile without any indication that anything racist actually happened. These findings from this research was
big surprise. Big surprise. When you base everything around something, people are going to think it's because of that thing. Yeah, duh. Like, whenever you tier list out different racial groups and different gender groups, it's going to cause people to view each other with a sense of resentment. Like, all it's done for is to divide people and make them hate each other. It's that simple.
Shocking and forceful that the authors automatically, they'd use 324 participants in the original piece of work in which they gave some people just a completely race neutral...
And I think also, like, here's another component to it, is that when you try to teach that the way you interact with the world is coded by your race, what you do is you create a self-fulfilling prophecy that that's the case. So like if you go into it thinking that something bad is going to happen and you've been continuously indoctrinated into thinking that like these things are the reality, it's going to be much harder to break out of that predisposition and to just see things in an authentic way.
Piece of text on corn, of all topics, to read. And then they gave other participants these really race-baity articles by well-known Kendi and D'Angelo, who are really big on all things racism. So they got all these participants together and then they gave them a completely race-neutral scenario in which a student is rejected from college, and they asked for these people's responses. Well, the research was absolutely comprehensive. The implications of these findings can simply not be downplayed. The research clearly showed that instead of achieving equality, dismantling systemic oppression, which is what all these DEI tick boxes are supposed to be doing, they may well, in fact, be deepening divisions.
I don't think that they're supposed to do that. All they're supposed to do is create a job for the people that says it's a problem. Is people create a problem and then present themselves as a solution. That's what happens. And I think that the like human resources and like the like social like structure of like companies, they try to create a necessity for themselves. Because you have to keep in mind, like, I think it's kind of the same as, like, when a company has, like, you know, a website and then they constantly redesign the website every 6 months. Well, why is that? Well, that's because the graphic designers don't want to get fired. You don't want to make a perfect website because if you do, then they'll just get rid of you. So now, like, what these people do is they create these new problems and they're like, okay, well, we've identified these problems. And it just so happens that we're the ones who are uniquely qualified to solve them. So they create a problem and then necessitate their existence and then also create more of themselves in general in the company. So it's harder to get rid of them as a block. You see what I'm saying? It's like literally like basically an infection.
And this cultural resentment between races. So well done to all the corporations spending $8 billion a year on this rubbish. You may well be undermining the very cause that you claim to be promoting. Now,
they don't care about promoting a cause. They just care about doing something that's going to make people view them more positively. Like, it doesn't matter to Starbucks about, like, what people think of, like, it doesn't matter to them anything. Like, they just want to sell coffee, right? But they're going to do things that they think will align with the values that their customer base has because they think that will cause their customers to buy more stuff with them. It's that simple.
Research was, like I say, so comprehensive, so decisive. The researchers couldn't believe it, and they said, okay, let's go again. We'll do the exact same thing, but with almost 3 times the amount of participants. So this time they got together just under 1,000 people, much bigger set of participants there, and they found exactly the same thing. They got exactly the same research data back.
I feel like you could easily assume that, again, if you like indoctrinate people into thinking that everything that they experience is coded through their race or gender or sexuality, that's going to make them more unhappy. Because, like, fundamentally, what are you doing to them? You're taking away their individualism, you're taking away their own agency, and you're taking away their unique experience on the world, and you're replacing it with something that is sometimes right, sometimes not right. Yeah, I mean, I feel like, yeah, exactly. This is like one of those situations where it's like, you know, anybody could have figured this out without the research.
I think it's absolutely incredible as well that this research has been suppressed. The New York Times refused to touch it, despite the fact that they had over 20 times previously publicized the NCRI's findings on other research that they'd done. And Bloomberg just turned around and said, not on your life. The editor was like, I'm not touching this. We're all about DEI. So God forbid we let people know that, in fact, research shows this stuff ain't even working. Not only is it not working.
Well, this is the reason why they do that. And this is the reason why so many of these like journalists and people in media and the other like people that are involved in like this type of like power politics, this is why they're so hostile to freedom of speech. It's because they know that if people can actually talk about things like this openly, they'll arrive at the conclusion that it's destructive. So what they do instead is they try to shut down, demonize, gaslight, and misrepresent the people that they disagree with and make sure that nobody can actually really hear the truth. Because they know that if they do hear the truth, it's going to break the bubble. It will pop the bubble. That's it. And so politicians terrorists, well, I don't know about that. I think this is just like average people. And also another big reason is that, and this is a problem, and there's like a group bias with like, I would say the media in general, especially Western media. So a lot of people don't want to come out with a title that says DEI training linked to increased hostility. They don't want to come out and say that because if they do, now they've alienated the other people that are on their side that they have to work with in the industry. So that's the reason why a lot of journalists don't want to talk about it also. It's not even that they don't agree with it. It's that they don't want to have this negatively affect their career. And they know that the people that are like in favor of it, they will use this to attack somebody. And you can see this happen, like, for example, there like any video game that doesn't adhere to like this type of like thinking. Like, for example, like you can look at Kingdom Come Deliverance, or you can look at Stellar Blade, or you can look at Black Myth Wukong. Think about all of the different ways that media has tried to covertly assassinate the character and undermine the integrity of the company and those games, and doing so in a way that's actually damaging to the company. Like when you run an article and you write and you say like this company is misogynist, or they don't like women, or this game is like, it sexualizes women or promotes violence against women. This is a very heavy accusation that a person can make. And the only reason it's not taken more seriously, it's because nobody cares about the media anymore, and for good reason. And this is the reason. And so it's weird because like if people did care, there would be more accountability for it. But because they don't matter, what they do doesn't matter either. So what ends up happening is that you have people that are in the media and they do share these viewpoints, but they're terrified of expressing it because if they do, then they immediately get labeled as like as a heretic, basically, right? And you can see again, like you can look at those games that I gave examples of, and you can see how, and like remember there was that one smaller game, it was like some pixel game where like they didn't want to add trans characters because it was just like not really on the list of things to do for like the, it was like a medieval, like lineage game. So yeah, big surprise you didn't have trans characters in medieval lineage game. Soul Ash, yeah, there you go, Soul Ash 2. And you see how like they just massively misrepresent and completely destroy the character and the integrity of one of these people. And I think this is really the reason why I talk about this stuff a lot. It's because I feel like these people are effectively trying to exercise a type of creative and social control that I find to be absolutely disgusting. And I've always hated these people. I hated these people whenever I was a kid and they told me I couldn't play Pokemon. I hated these people whenever I was a teenager and they said that I shouldn't play Diablo, Doom, and Grand Theft Auto. And I hate them now as an adult whenever they tell me that I shouldn't play Stellar Blade or Black Myth Wukong. I think that they're all the same people, and it doesn't really matter like what direction it's coming from. All of these people are fundamentally oppressive, authoritarian people that are trying to tell me what to do with my life and trying to order me around and tell me that I have to do what they say. No, I don't. And nobody else does either. And I think people are finally waking up and realizing that. And it's no surprise that there are a lot of people that feel this way. And in my opinion, I think it is the super majority, like the 80 or 90% majority of people that don't want to be told what to think and what they can and can't enjoy by some weirdo, or really not even by some weirdo, by anyone. They don't want to be told like what to do. And so this is the reason why I have like such a, like, people criticize me and they say that like I talk about this stuff too much. But in my opinion, sometimes I think I don't talk about it enough, because I feel like this type of ideology has completely damaged society on a fundamental level. Like, I remember when I was a kid, before this stuff got super popular, and everybody got along, and there was no real, like, hostility. Like, people would make racial jokes. Nobody took it personally. Everything was relatively normal. And then you had these people that, again, probably should be in mental institutions that are now, they're running the asylum, and they're trying to make their contrived, distorted, weird worldview the rules for engagement for life. And I think that's really what the issue is that you have these people that are profoundly socially awkward. You have these people that just have probably no friends. They're completely disagreeable, unlikable. And these people are now trying to make rules for engagement that everybody else has to follow because they've somehow gaslighted the population into thinking that offending them matters. Well, maybe if you feel uncomfortable, it's your problem. Maybe you're the weirdo who constantly feels uncomfortable all the time whenever you're around people that aren't like you. And so that's the reason. And I think it's affected people on like a personal level. It's affected society. It's affected media. It's affected entertainment. It's affected everything. And the reason why I speak out against it a lot and I talk about it a lot is because I think that this mindset is incredibly toxic, and it is probably one of the most toxic mindsets that our current culture has. It's completely destructive. It creates nothing. And all it does is it makes people hate each other. That's it. And so that's why I talk about it a lot. The issue is more dangerous than people think. Exactly. And you also have more people now, like we've had a number of like shooters and people like that, that go out and commit like really bad crimes that become radicalized by this ideology, either directly by it or as an antithesis of it. So I think it's just very obvious that this is extremely dangerous. It is killing people. So you're mad at people getting offended by the things you say? I'm mad at them getting offended and then trying to tell me that I'm the one that has the problem. If you're getting offended by something that I'm saying, then stop listening to what I'm saying. Stop trying to tell me that I have to police my language because of your feelings. If you want to change, if you don't like what I'm saying, that's totally fine. I respect your point of view. You don't have to listen to it. But that whenever you say that I'm not allowed to express this opinion or I'm not able to think this way, then I do have a big problem with it. And the problem is that it's kind of like the whole idea of punch Nazis. Everybody agrees that Nazis are bad, and we killed a bunch of them in World War II. Huge W, by the way. And we all know Nazis are bad. But the issue is that when somebody says punch Nazis or kill Nazis, and they categorize somebody as a Nazi for voting for Donald Trump, that becomes a big issue. That's the problem. The problem is that they create these like different dynamics of like dehumanization, and then they apply them in a broad spectrum to everybody that they disagree with. Nazi doesn't mean anything anymore? Yeah, exactly, right? And so that's the way that I feel about it. Like that's why I think this is so problematic.
It's undermining the very causes we think that we're achieving. It's just incredible, Joe. Nobody wants to admit the failure.
It is incredible. I mean, I suppose what the report's trying to get at is that if you are told that racism is absolutely everywhere and that you've got to be hyper vigilant and look for it everywhere because it is everywhere, and you just haven't been seeing it before, then obviously you're going to see it everywhere. And the problem with seeing it everywhere is then you miss it when it actually...
Well, you can never, like in a lot of cases, when you have a negative interaction with a person, you can never know that the negative interaction was caused by one characteristic you have. Sometimes you can know that, but it's actually quite uncommon. I think a really good example of this is that they did a study with women where they painted a scar on people's faces and then they had them go into a job interview. And sometimes they also painted the scar off of their face and they told them that they still had it on. And the people that had it on or off, that believed that they had it on or off, thought that the interviewer was giving them feedback or treating them differently because of that image on their face or because of that scar on their face. That's wild. Well, no, it's normal, right? So it's like if you think about this, it's going to be all about this. It's kind of like if all you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. Well, this is their hammer. So everything has to look like that nail. So it's cool. Yeah, perception becomes reality. Exactly. And here's another good example, right? Is that like there's oftentimes like people say like, oh, well, if you don't wear certain clothes, you're not going to get like, sexually harassed or something like that. But there's a massive and this is a totally untrue statement, right? Because there are tons of women that said this is what I was wearing whenever I was sexually harassed or assaulted. And it's just normal people clothes. That's it. And so again, if you paint things in that direction, you're going to make people think that even when it's not true.
Matters and when it's real. And so this is the whole problem with anything to do with identity politics or race-based politics. It doesn't address the disadvantage that someone may or may not be suffering because of their race. It just means that you see racism everywhere, and you are more likely to see all this racism and indeed experience all this racism if you are alive to, awake to, or if you will, woke to the racism, which means that it is usually the most overprivileged, tertiary educated, affluent, well-educated people, and I use that in air quotes.
Well, you're always going to see, I mean, it's the same thing with Just Stop Oil or any of these other protesters that go out and they like those people, for example, remember the video that we showed of like the people that were like trying to like run onto the chicken farm? Do you know what one of the commonalities between all of them are? It's mainly a bunch of rich upper class or middle upper class affluent white people. They don't work? Yeah, they're rich kids most of the time. And this was like, especially whenever like blocking the road was really popular, you would see plenty of people, and these are like minority, like some like minority guy, some like black guy, Hispanic, I don't know. And he's like sitting in a truck. He's trying to drive a truck because that's his job. And then you have these, these again, upper middle class, affluent white people that are laying in the street because they're trying to stop inequality or they care about the climate. Yeah, the Just Stop Oil. Yeah, exactly. Like those girls that got sent to jail for Just Stop Oil, they came from affluent families. And I think the reason why it happens is that a lot of those people that come from the affluent families, I think that they have a sense of internalized guilt because they know that they've lived probably the most privileged existence that's ever been dreamt of in the history of humankind. And they feel that guilt, so they look for a way that they can relate to people that haven't had the experience that they had. So like they're doing it out of guilt, but it's not necessarily guilt because they're white or something like that. It's like 10 different things coming together that create that. It's like, not only are you white, which probably is like being the majority race in a country is better. It's definitely better. Of course it is, right? More people look like you. There's a million studies for this. Sure, right? Of course people would want to feel that way. Then you have the fact that they make more money. Then they live in a high level of technology. Then in a lot of cases, they're educated. Then they live in a first world country. Like you look at all of these biases and all of these privileges put together, it's not just one thing, it's like 10 different things.
Who feel the most racially oppressed, even though they are in fact the most
feel guilty because they're filthy rich
of their race, typically. So, so that is why it is completely perverse and backward, and it's why I think we should always see things in terms of disadvantage instead of seeing things in terms of racism. So, all right, who is worse off? Who is really suffering? Now, there's no question that, for example, there are Indigenous communities in Australia that are terribly disadvantaged and have horrible outcomes in terms of violence, substance abuse, health, educational outcomes, job opportunities, all that sort of stuff. But you focus on those disadvantages and you fix them rather than saying, okay.
Well, that's hard to do. So that's why they don't do it. It's much easier to change your flag or complain about things being racist and try to make these platitudes than actually trying to sit down and address the problem directly and systematically. It costs money and time. Yeah, exactly.
Because this terrible disadvantage is happening in Wilcannia, we better make sure that we're not racist to, you know, affluent Indigenous people who just happen to be Indigenous but living in, you know, say inner city Woollahra or Glebe or Newtown or Northcote. And so the whole problem with seeing things through the lens of race, through the lens of colour, is it actually ignores disadvantage. And that is why it is so attractive to the new left, if you like, so the East and West Coast elites, because
it's easy. The reason why, that's because it's easy, and it's easy to put it out there and to act like you're the right person for doing it. That's the reason why.
Claim disadvantage, they can claim oppression. They can say, oh, I've been, you know, hi, I'm from MSNBC and I'm discriminated against because despite the fact I earn $300,000 a year, I'm black. Whereas instead of ignoring the fact that there are heaps of disadvantaged people who are not getting a look
it's not even a question.
Because rich, privileged elites are soaking up all the oppression for themselves because they're the ones who are alive to it and can see it everywhere. It's a sickness.
No, I think he's totally right. And I feel like, again, the main reason why this stuff happens is very simple. They're just doing it because they think that it's the right thing to do and it makes them look good. That's all they care about. It's as soon as you understand that all of these social movements for most people in the country are about optics and not about ideology, everything else immediately falls into place and makes instant sense. Because it's like you always ask yourself questions where it's like, well, why are you for this but not for this other thing? Well, now it makes sense. And I think if you think about it that way, and it does. Saying, no, that's not the right way. What is this? Same people fighting for inequality would have done nothing in the Civil War for slavery. I think that some of them would, some of them wouldn't. But in a lot of cases, these people's, their activism ends when actions begin. They're not willing to actually sacrifice anything for what they believe in. They're not willing to even say an opinion that's unpopular in the space that they're currently in. These are people that don't want anything to do. Yeah, they don't want to have to do anything. They just want to be seen as a good person. That's it.